The day of the final performance arrived, and the atmosphere in the hall was different from any other day. There was a quiet tension in the air, a mixture of excitement, anticipation, and awe. People had heard about her previous performances, and the whispers had traveled quickly. Contestants who had once laughed at her now watched with curiosity and respect. Teachers and audience members alike seemed to hold their breath, waiting to see what she would do next. She arrived early, carrying her bag and a small notebook filled with compositions she had worked on quietly at home. Her hands were steady, though her heart thumped with a familiar rhythm, a rhythm she had learned to embrace. She did not feel nervous in the usual way. She felt focused, ready to share the music that had lived in her soul for so long. As she waited for her turn, she observed the hall. It was crowded with people, some familiar from the previous days, others new faces drawn by stories of her performances. She noticed a few contestants whispering to each other, glancing at her nervously. One of them, who had been particularly confident and boastful, seemed almost shaken. The realization that talent could come from the most unexpected place had clearly unsettled him. She took a deep breath and opened her notebook, reviewing a piece she had written just the night before. It was simple but filled with emotion, capturing a feeling she had experienced recently. The mixture of hope and fear, of courage and doubt that had accompanied her journey. This piece would be her final statement, a reflection of everything she had lived and learned. When her name was called, she stood and walked to the piano. The applause was immediate, but she hardly noticed it. Her focus was on the keys, on the music she wanted to convey. She adjusted the bench, let her fingers rest lightly on the keys, and closed her eyes. For a brief moment, she let herself remember the early days, the quiet nights at the restaurant piano, her mother's encouragement, the small victories that had built her confidence. The first notes were soft, gentle, almost hesitant, but full of feeling. She allowed the music to flow naturally, letting her heart guide her. As the piece progressed, it became more powerful, more commanding. Each note carried a part of her story, the struggles, the perseverance, the quiet triumphs that had never been noticed before. She played not to impress, not to compete, but to communicate the essence of her life. The room fell completely silent. The audience was captivated, leaning forward, holding their breath. Even the judges, who had seen countless auditions and performances, seemed momentarily lost for words. They were not judging technique or speed. They were feeling the music, feeling the life behind every note. She noticed subtle reactions around her. The young boy who had been watching her from the beginning looked up from his notebook, eyes wide and bright. The other contestants were frozen in their seats, some with expressions of shock, others with admiration. A few had tears in their eyes, unable to reconcile the simplicity of her appearance with the power and depth of her music. She played with complete abandon now, fully immersed in the story she wanted to tell. Her fingers danced over the keys with grace and precision, yet every movement carried emotion. She allowed herself to feel everything, the fear she had faced, the doubt she had overcome, the moments of quiet joy she had treasured. The music was no longer just sound. It was a living, breathing extension of herself. As she reached the climax of the piece, the room seemed to vibrate with the intensity of her playing. Every chord, every pause, every flourish was intentional yet natural. She was no longer just performing. She was sharing a part of her soul with everyone present. She could sense the energy in the room changing, people leaning in, listening not just with their ears but with their hearts. Finally, she reached the final note. It lingered in the air, resonant and clear, a moment of pure stillness. The silence that followed was profound, a collective pause as everyone absorbed what they had just experienced. Then slowly applause began, hesitant at first, then growing louder, filling the hall with warmth and admiration. People rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, and some wiping tears from their eyes. She lowered her hands and bowed gracefully, a quiet smile on her face. The acknowledgement was not about fame or recognition. It was about connection. She had communicated something real, something meaningful, and it had been received. That, she realized, was the true purpose of music, to connect hearts and souls beyond words. The judges approached her afterward. Their expressions were a mixture of amazement and respect. One of them, an older man with kind eyes, spoke first. "You have done something extraordinary. Your music is not just skill. It is truth. You have a gift that cannot be taught, and it touches people in ways that are rare and beautiful." Another judge nodded, adding, "We have seen many talented performers, but what you have shared goes beyond talent. It is courage, honesty, and heart. You have reminded us all why music matters." She listened quietly, feeling a warmth in her chest. She had never sought accolades, yet the recognition felt meaningful. It was not about proving herself to anyone else. It was about the acknowledgement that her journey, her struggles, and her heart had value. She had stayed true to herself, and that truth had resonated with everyone in the room. The other contestants approached her, some hesitantly, some with nervous admiration. "You're playing. It's incredible," one said quietly. "I've never heard anything like it." Another nodded, adding, "You make us feel something we didn't expect. You've changed the way I think about music." She smiled gently, accepting their words with humility. She knew that their admiration was not about competition. It was about recognition of something deeper, something genuine. She had not only proven her skill, but had also inspired others to see beyond appearances and expectations. Later, she stepped outside for a breath of fresh air. The evening sky was painted with soft shades of pink and gold, the city bathed in a calm light. She walked slowly, feeling the music still flow within her. It was no longer confined to the piano. It had become part of her, part of the world around her. She thought about the journey that had brought her here. Every quiet evening spent alone at the piano, every moment of doubt, every small triumph had led to this. She realized that success was not measured by awards or recognition alone. It was measured by courage, persistence, and the willingness to share one's truth, even when the world seemed to overlook it. A small girl in the park caught her attention, struggling with a tiny keyboard. She watched the girl, recognizing the same determination she had once had. In that moment, she realized that her journey could inspire others. Her music, her story, and her courage could encourage someone else to follow their own path, to trust in their own abilities, and to remain true to themselves. Walking home, she felt a sense of peace and fulfillment. The world had seen her talent, but more importantly, she had shared her heart. She had faced judgment, ridicule, and doubt, yet she had remained authentic. That authenticity, she understood, was the most powerful gift she could offer. Back in her small apartment, she sat at the piano one last time that evening. She played quietly, letting the music flow without concern for audience or recognition. Each note was a reflection of her journey, of struggle, perseverance, courage, and hope. The music filled the room, warm and resonant, a private celebration of everything she had accomplished. She thought of her mother, who had always believed in her, who had encouraged her to keep playing when no one else listened. She imagined her mother's smile, her quiet pride, and felt a deep sense of gratitude. It was those small, unseen moments that had shaped her, that had given her the courage to continue when the world doubted her. Her hands moved over the keys effortlessly, yet with careful attention. She did not need to impress anyone. She played because she loved it, because it was a part of who she was. The music was her voice, her story, her heart made audible. As the final notes faded into the evening air, she leaned back, letting her hands rest on her lap. She felt a quiet joy, a sense of completeness. She had come far, faced challenges, and shared her truth. The world had seen her, heard her, and acknowledged the depth of her music. For the first time in her life, she felt fully seen, fully understood, and fully alive. She had begun her journey quietly, in a small restaurant with a piano that no one noticed. And now, through courage, persistence, and heart, she had touched lives, inspired others, and proven that true talent is not measured by appearances, wealth, or training, but by the honesty of one's soul. And as she sat there, alone with her piano, she smiled softly, knowing that this was only the beginning of a life filled with music, connection, and the quiet, enduring power of staying true to oneself. The next day, she returned to the audition hall. Her heart felt lighter than it had the previous morning, yet a strange tension lingered in the air. Word of her performance had spread quickly among the contestants, teachers, and even some audience members who had come to watch the second round. People whispered as she walked past, glancing at her with curiosity, admiration, and in some cases disbelief. She carried herself with quiet confidence, not arrogant, not showy, just steady. Her shoes were the same worn-out pair from yesterday, her dress still plain, and yet she felt a sense of purpose she had never experienced before. This was not about appearances. This was about music, and for her, Music was life itself. As she waited for her turn, she noticed small changes in the way people treated her. The young man who had mocked her on the first day avoided eye contact, shifting nervously as if he had suddenly realized he had underestimated her. The other contestants, who had once whispered and laughed behind her back, now seemed hesitant to speak at all when she passed. Some even offered polite nods or quiet smiles, acknowledging something that had once seemed impossible. She sat quietly in the back of the room, tuning out the murmurs. Her mind was focused on the music she wanted to share, on the story she wanted to tell. The room buzzed with anticipation as the next group of performers went on stage. Some were confident, some nervous, but all seemed aware of the weight her presence carried. She realized that even without trying, she had become a standard against which others measured themselves. Her name was called sooner than she expected. She walked to the stage feeling the familiar coolness of the piano keys under her fingers. She adjusted the bench, took a deep breath, and closed her eyes for a moment. Memories flooded her mind. The countless evenings at the old restaurant piano, the encouraging smile of her mother, the long hours spent perfecting each note in solitude. All of it had led to this moment. She began to play. This time her music was bolder, richer, yet still simple in its honesty. Each note carried the essence of her life, the struggles, the triumphs, the quiet moments of hope that had kept her going. She did not think about the judges, the audience, or the other contestants. She played as she always had, from the heart, letting the music flow naturally. The room fell silent. People stopped whispering, leaning in to hear every note. The judges, who had seen countless auditions, watched intently, their pens hovering over their papers. They could no longer ignore the depth and sincerity of her music. It was not just skill that made it remarkable. It was the way it conveyed life itself. She noticed the reactions around her. The young boy in the audience who had been drawing and scribbling looked up, eyes wide, completely absorbed. Some contestants' faces were a mixture of awe and disbelief. Even the older, experienced musicians seemed momentarily taken aback, unable to reconcile the simplicity of her appearance with the intensity of her talent. As the piece progressed, she allowed herself to become completely immersed. Her fingers moved effortlessly across the keys, guided by memory, emotion, and instinct. She played passages that were delicate, almost fragile, then surged into sections that were powerful and commanding. Every change in tempo and volume reflected a part of her story, and it reached the audience in a way that was undeniable. At one point, she looked up briefly, catching the gaze of one of the judges. For a split second, she saw surprise, then recognition. A silent acknowledgement that what she was playing was extraordinary. No words were spoken, but she felt the shift in energy, the understanding that her music had touched something beyond mere technical skill. When the last note lingered in the hall, the silence was profound. It was as if time had stopped, and everyone in the room was suspended in the moment, trying to absorb what they had just witnessed. Slowly, applause began. It was hesitant at first, then grew, spreading like a wave. People stood, clapping and cheering, some with tears in their eyes. She bowed quietly, letting the music of the audience's response wash over her. Back at her seat, she felt a mixture of relief and wonder. She had expected skepticism, perhaps polite acknowledgement, but the reaction had exceeded anything she could have imagined. People were talking about her in whispers, some openly complimenting her, others still trying to comprehend how someone so simple in appearance could play with such depth and emotion. During a short break, a teacher approached her. He was an older man, well respected in the music community, with a kind but serious expression. "Your performance. It is unlike anything I have ever heard," he said softly. "You have something rare. Not just talent, but the ability to make people feel your story. Do not ever lose that." She nodded quietly, humbled by his words. She had never sought recognition, and yet she felt the weight of their meaning. It was not about fame or praise. It was about being seen for what she truly was, for the truth in her music. That alone was enough. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of performances. Some were technically brilliant, some struggled, but all seemed aware that her presence had shifted the dynamic. Judges whispered among themselves. Audience members leaned forward with curiosity, and even the contestants appeared more thoughtful, perhaps questioning their own approach to music. Her next performance was not planned, but she was asked to play again for the judges' final evaluation. She approached the piano calmly, Feeling the familiar touch of the keys beneath her fingers, she closed her eyes and let her heart guide her. This piece was entirely her own, a composition she had created in the quiet of her small apartment, inspired by her memories and emotions. As she played, the room transformed. The audience was silent, listening with rapt attention. The judges' expressions were intense, their pens poised but unused. Each note she played carried layers of meaning, each chord resonating with a sense of honesty and vulnerability. She could see the subtle changes in the listeners, the widening of eyes, the leaning forward, the small gasps of surprise. She played not to impress, not to compete, but to communicate. The music flowed effortlessly, sometimes soft and delicate, sometimes strong and commanding. Each variation reflected her journey, the quiet nights of practice, the long days of work, the moments of doubt and hope. And through it all, the audience could feel it. By the time the final note faded, there was complete silence for a moment longer than seemed natural. Then slowly applause erupted. It was overwhelming, sincere, and full of emotion. People stood, some cheering, some wiping tears from their eyes. Even the judges were moved, exchanging looks of astonishment and admiration. One of the judges approached her afterward. "You have done something extraordinary," he said. "You have shown us that talent is not just about training or technique. It is about heart, courage, and honesty. You have a gift and the world needs to see it." She felt a warmth in her chest, not from praise but from recognition. She had spent her life playing quietly, alone or for a small audience, never expecting this. And now people were not only listening, they were seeing, truly seeing what she had to offer. Word of her performance spread quickly. By the end of the day, whispers and conversations about her filled the hall. Contestants who had once mocked or doubted her now approached with respect, some offering congratulations, others asking questions about her techniques and experiences. Even people who had been skeptical were forced to acknowledge her talent. She realized that something had changed. She had not only performed, she had altered perceptions. People who had dismissed her because of her appearance, her simplicity, or her background now had to reconsider. She had become proof that genuine talent and heart could not be ignored. Walking home that evening, she felt a sense of fulfillment unlike anything she had known. The streets, bathed in the warm glow of streetlights, seemed to reflect her inner calm. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the long nights of practice, the quiet determination, the moments of doubt and struggle. All of it had led to this recognition, not because she had sought it, but because she had remained true to herself. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future she had not dared to dream of. Perhaps she could teach, perform, or even share her music with a larger audience. But even if she did not, she knew that she had accomplished something far greater. She had proved, to herself and to the world, that heart and honesty mattered more than appearances or expectations. As she walked, she noticed a young girl sitting on a bench, quietly playing a small keyboard. The girl looked up at her and smiled shyly. In that moment, she realized that her journey might inspire others in ways she could not yet imagine. Just as she had been encouraged by her mother, and by the quiet moments of practice, others might now find hope and courage in what she had done. And for the first time in her life, she felt that her music, her heart, and her story had truly found their place in the world. The moment she stepped onto the stage for her next performance, a hush fell over the hall. People who had been whispering and talking among themselves paused, their attention turning fully to her. She took a deep breath, feeling the smooth surface of the piano under her fingers. The chair felt familiar yet strange, as though it was a bridge between her quiet past and the moment she had always dreamed about. The judges looked at her intently. One of them adjusted his glasses, leaning forward slightly, as if trying to read her expression to understand what she might play. The audience leaned in as well, some with curiosity, some with polite skepticism. She could feel their eyes, but she didn't let it distract her. Her mind was elsewhere. Remembering the first time she had played in that small corner of the restaurant, when no one was listening but her mother, she closed her eyes for a moment and let herself remember every detail. The soft hum of the kitchen, the clinking of dishes, the smell of freshly baked bread, and the warmth of her mother's encouraging smile. Those memories filled her with courage. She placed her fingers gently on the keys and began to play. The first notes were soft, almost tentative but deliberate. They carried a quiet honesty that could not be taught. a simple melody that seemed to float above the polished grandeur of the hall. At first, a few of the audience members leaned back, unsure. They were expecting something flashy, something complex, something they could compare to the performances of the other contestants. But as the notes continued, something shifted. Her music told a story, of small victories, of late nights filled with determination, of hope that refused to die despite struggle. It was not about perfection, but about truth. With each passing second, the audience leaned forward, drawn into her world, drawn to the raw emotion that flowed effortlessly from her fingers. She was unaware of the subtle gasps, the quiet inhalations of breath, the small movements of surprise as people realized that someone so ordinary in appearance could hold such extraordinary feeling in her music. She felt only the connection between herself and the piano, between her heart and the story she wanted to tell. Her hands moved more confidently now, the rhythm steady, yet flexible, carrying the highs and lows of her journey. Every note was deliberate yet free. She did not play to impress. She did not play to compete. She played to express, to share a part of herself that had been waiting for this moment. As she continued, she noticed a few faces in the audience changing. The young boy who had been scribbling in his notebook looked up, his eyes wide, almost as if he were seeing something magical. The judges, usually composed and stern, were leaning forward, their faces thoughtful, almost tense. One of them whispered to another, and she could sense their curiosity growing with each note she played. She did not stop to think about them. She had learned long ago that playing for judgment or approval robbed the music of its soul. Instead, she focused on the story she wanted to tell. She thought about her mother, about the countless evenings spent alone at the piano, about the small moments of triumph when a difficult passage finally came together. Each memory, each feeling was woven into the music she created. The melody grew, swelling with emotion. She allowed herself to move with the music, letting her body feel the rhythm and flow. She imagined herself back in that small restaurant, playing not for critics or judges, but for someone who understood, someone who felt what she felt. That sense of intimacy, of connection, seemed to fill the hall, touching the hearts of those listening. For the first time, she noticed the reactions more clearly. The young man who had mocked her earlier sat frozen, his mouth slightly open. One of the other contestants, a woman in a bright dress, had her hand over her heart, as if trying to contain the sudden emotion that had overwhelmed her. Even the seasoned judges seemed momentarily speechless, their pens hovering over their notes as they tried to capture something that could not be written down. As the piece reached its climax, her fingers moved swiftly yet gracefully across the keys. The music surged like a wave, full of energy and passion, yet never losing the simplicity that made it unique. She could hear the soft thrum of the piano, feel its vibration under her fingers, and sense the silent connection between herself and everyone in the room. Then, with a final deliberate chord, she ended the piece. The last note lingered in the air, echoing softly. For a moment there was silence, the kind of silence that made the room feel suspended in time, as if everyone was holding their breath, trying to let the experience sink in. Finally, the applause began. It started quietly, hesitantly, as if people were unsure how to react. Then it grew, filling the hall with warmth and appreciation. Some people clapped with tears in their eyes. Others stood, giving her a standing ovation. She lowered her hands and bowed gently, her heart beating fast, her cheeks flushed. She felt a strange mix of relief and joy, a feeling she had never known before. Back at her seat, she could feel the eyes of the judges on her. One of them leaned forward, speaking quietly to the others. She caught a few words: remarkable, unexpected, pure emotion. The phrases were fleeting, but they were enough to make her chest swell with quiet pride. She had not played to impress them, yet they could not ignore what she had shared. She thought about the contrast between her world and theirs. They had years of formal training, expensive lessons, and countless opportunities to refine their skill. She had only her determination, her memory, and the countless hours of practice in quiet, lonely evenings. Yet here she was, standing out in a way that could not be measured by scores or technique alone. As the next contestants went on, she watched from her seat. She noticed that the mood in the hall had shifted. People who had once whispered or laughed now looked on with respect. There was a sense of curiosity, a desire to understand the simple woman who had captured their attention so completely. Some contestants looked nervous, unsure how to follow someone whose music had been so full of heart. She realized something important. Talent was not just about technical skill or speed. It was about honesty, courage, and the willingness to be vulnerable. It was about telling a story that only you could tell, sharing it with those who would listen, and trusting that the truth of it would resonate. She had spent her life learning this quietly, away from judgment, and now it was showing. During a brief pause, one of the judges approached her again. "You have something rare," he said softly, looking directly at her. "It's not just skill. It's the way you communicate through your music. Don't ever lose that." She nodded, unable to find the right words. She had learned long ago that words were not always necessary. The acknowledgement in his eyes was enough. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. She performed another piece, this time even more personal, a composition she had created herself. Her fingers moved with confidence and ease, guided by her heart. The audience listened quietly, drawn in by the sincerity of her music. When the final note faded, the applause was immediate and heartfelt. People rose to their feet, some clapping, some wiping away tears, some simply staring in awe. Back at her seat, she allowed herself a small smile. She had come here expecting doubt and judgment. Instead, she had found understanding and respect. It was a powerful feeling, one she had never known in her life. For the first time, she felt that her music had truly been seen, appreciated not for its perfection, but for its honesty. As the day drew to a close, she packed her things slowly, savoring the moment. The other contestants glanced at her, some nodding in quiet respect, others still unsure how to react. She had learned something important today. The world might try to underestimate you, to judge you by appearances, by circumstance, by expectation. But if you stay true to yourself, if you let your heart speak, people will notice. She stepped outside into the cool evening air. The sun had begun to set, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold. She felt a sense of peace she had not felt in years. The city seemed quieter, kinder somehow, as if the world had paused to let her savor this moment. She walked slowly, thinking about the journey that had brought her here. Every quiet night at the piano, every struggle, every doubt had been worth it. She had faced judgment, skepticism, and ridicule, yet she had emerged stronger, seen for who she truly was. And that, she realized, was the most important victory of all. Even as she walked home, she could feel the music still flowing through her. It was not confined to the piano anymore. It was in her steps, in her heartbeat, in the way the wind moved through the streets. She understood now that music was not just a skill to be measured. It was a part of life, a connection to the world, a way to share the deepest parts of oneself without words. And for the first time in a long time, she felt truly alive. The room seemed to hold its breath as she finished her second piece. She lowered her hand slowly, letting the last note fade into the quiet. The judges scribbled on their papers, exchanging small looks with one another. The audience remained still, some leaning forward slightly as if trying to catch something invisible in the air. Even the other contestants, who had been chatting quietly among themselves, stopped talking. She walked back to her seat, careful not to rush, careful not to look like she was expecting praise. She felt a strange mix of nerves and relief. She had played from her heart again, and that was all she could do. What came next, when whether applause or criticism, mattered little. But she could feel the energy around her shifting. Some of the contestants were whispering, looking at her with curiosity rather than ridicule. A few of them looked uneasy, as if the reality of her talent was difficult to process. One young man shifted in his seat, his fingers drumming nervously against his notebook. He had clearly underestimated her, and now he wasn't sure what to think. For a moment, she allowed herself to think about the journey that had brought her here. She had started playing the piano on an old half-broken instrument in a small restaurant where she worked as a waitress. The piano had keys that stuck and notes that sometimes sounded off, but it had been hers in a way. Every evening, when the last customers left and the room fell quiet, she would sit and play, letting her fingers wander over the keys, teaching herself one note at a time. She remembered her mother sitting nearby in a worn chair, listening silently. Sometimes her mother would smile. Sometimes her eyes would glisten with tears. "Your music is from the heart," her mother used to say. "That is worth more than any lessons money could buy." Those words had stayed with her, a quiet encouragement that no amount of hardship could erase. She thought about the years she had spent balancing work and practice. After long shifts, when her legs ached and her back hurt from standing all day, she would still return to the piano, her fingers stiff but determined. There were nights when she thought about giving up, when exhaustion and doubt pressed down so heavily that she wondered if she could continue. But every time she sat at the piano anyway. She played because it was the only thing that made her feel alive. The judges began calling the next round of performers. She watched quietly, listening closely. There was a difference now in how she perceived the music. Before, she had noticed only mistakes or brilliance in the technical sense. Now she was paying attention to the feeling behind the notes. Some performers played beautifully, but she could sense the emotion was missing. Others made mistakes but played with such honesty that the room seemed to vibrate with their passion. She realized that this was the invisible part of music, the part that could not be taught, the part that could not be scored or measured. It came from life, from experiences, from the depths of a person's heart, and that was something she had in abundance even if she had never had formal training or wealthy patrons to support her. As she watched, a few contestants finished and returned to their seats. One of them, a young woman with a nervous expression, looked at her hesitantly. I liked the way you played," she said softly. "It was different." "I've never heard anyone play like that before." She smiled gently. "Thank you," she said quietly, though her voice barely carried. It was enough to see the young woman's expression change, from doubt to a small flicker of respect. She had learned that words were not always necessary. Sometimes a gesture, a nod, or a smile could carry as much weight as 1,000 compliments. During the next break, she stepped outside again to take a breath. The sky was now brighter and the sun warmed her face. She leaned against the cool wall, feeling the rough texture beneath her fingers. She thought about her life, about the long road she had traveled to reach this point. Each day of struggle, each moment of doubt, each quiet evening at the piano. It had all led her here. And she had no regrets. Inside, the next round began, and she watched the other contestants with a new perspective. She no longer felt intimidated by their confidence or their polished appearances. She understood now that their skill was real, but it was different from hers. They played for recognition, for scores, for the approval of the judges. She played for the music itself, for the memory of her mother, for the truth in her own heart. As the hours passed, she noticed something subtle changing in the room. The judges were paying closer attention to her. The whispers among the contestants were no longer mocking. They were filled with curiosity, wonder, and, in some cases, envy. She could sense the shift in energy, a recognition that talent could not always be predicted by appearances or formal training. She thought about her hands, the same hands that had washed dishes, carried heavy trays, and tapped nervously on worn tables. Those hands were her instrument, her voice, her connection to the world. Every callus, every scar, every small imperfection was a part of her story, a story that now had a place on this stage. A small boy in the audience caught her attention again. He was still scribbling in his notebook, completely absorbed in the performance. She smiled quietly to herself. Perhaps he was learning something important, something about courage, persistence, and the power of playing with honesty. She remembered how she had felt when she was his age, dreaming quietly of the day she could play for people who would truly listen. The next name was called, and she prepared herself mentally. This time it was not her turn yet, but she felt a growing sense of purpose. She realized that this day was more than just an audition. It was a test of character, of persistence, of the ability to remain true to oneself despite judgment, doubt, or ridicule. She felt a quiet pride in herself. She had come here with nothing but her love for music, and already she had made people notice. She watched another contestant go on stage, a young man with sleek hair and expensive shoes. He played a fast, complicated piece with precision and speed, but she noticed the lack of emotion. When he finished, the applause was polite but fleeting. She understood then that technique could impress, but it could not move hearts. Her own music, though simpler, had touched something deeper. During a brief pause, one of the judges approached her quietly. He spoke in a low voice, almost hesitant. "You're playing. It's unusual," he said. "You don't have formal training, do you?" She shook her head. "No," she replied softly. "I learned on my own." I couldn't afford lessons, but I listened, practiced, and played every day. He nodded slowly as if processing something he had not expected. It has honesty, something the others sometimes lack. Keep that in mind for the next round. She thanked him quietly and returned to her seat. She felt a warmth in her chest, not from praise but from the acknowledgement that her music mattered, that her heart had been seen. She realized that validation was not about being told she was talented. It was about people noticing the truth in what she created. The afternoon passed and the room grew more crowded as more contestants arrived. She noticed some who had once looked at her with disdain now watching her with interest. Some even whispered among themselves, perhaps wondering how someone so simple could play with such depth. She did not let it affect her. She had learned long ago that people's opinions were temporary, and the music itself was permanent. When she finally saw her name called for the next round, she felt a calm determination. She walked toward the stage, each step steady. She placed her hands on the keys, took a deep breath, and closed her eyes. She let the memories of her mother, the little restaurant piano, and every quiet night of practice fill her mind. This time, she did not play for anyone else. She played for herself, for the journey that had brought her here, for every struggle, every loss, every quiet victory. The notes flowed naturally, guided by her heart, each one carrying a piece of her story. The room seemed to lean in, listening, holding its breath, waiting for something extraordinary. By the time she finished, the silence was profound. The judges wrote quickly, exchanging glances. The audience murmured softly, some shifting in their seats, unsure how to react. But the quiet was not uncomfortable. It was respectful, an acknowledgement that something rare had been shared. As she returned to her seat, she felt a new sense of confidence. She had played from the heart again, and that was all she needed. The whispers, the judgment, the skepticism, they no longer mattered. She had found her voice, and it was heard. After she returned to her seat, the room seemed quieter, almost different. The other contestants whispered among themselves, glancing at her in a way that was hard to read. Some looked confused, as if they were trying to understand what had just happened. Others were impressed, though their expressions were guarded, hiding admiration behind carefully controlled faces. She kept her eyes on her hands, letting the warmth linger there, even as the adrenaline from playing slowly faded. For a moment, she thought about leaving. She could just get up and walk out, pretend it had been a private performance, and carry that memory home with her. But she stayed. She wanted to see the rest of this day, to hear the other performances, to witness what she had walked into. There was something in the air, a tension she couldn't name, a mixture of curiosity and doubt from everyone around her. The next contestant took the stage, a tall, confident man in a neatly pressed suit. He played a fast, complicated piece, one that demanded precision and training. His fingers moved like lightning across the keys, and he ended with a flourish, bowing confidently. The judges whispered among themselves, nodding and writing notes. The applause was polite, but she could tell it was different from the quiet respect her simple melody had earned. She realized that in this place, skill and training were respected and sometimes admired. But there was something else that her music had done. It had stopped people from judging instantly. Her melody had not been about speed or complexity. It had been about feeling, and in that she had made them pause. The contestants continued, each one trying to outshine the last. She listened carefully, noticing the small details in their playing, the expressions on their faces, the way their bodies moved with the music. She knew the techniques they used. At least she understood them from books and videos she had studied over the years. But she also understood that there was a difference between technique and heart. Some of them had plenty of technique, but their music felt empty to her. She could tell because she felt nothing from it. Her mind wandered back to the restaurant where she had learned to play, the little corner piano that nobody cared about. She remembered the evenings when the only audience was the clinking of dishes and the soft hum of conversation. She remembered the way her mother would close her eyes and listen, sometimes smiling, sometimes wiping away tears. Those memories had shaped her music, made it live beyond the keys. She realized that perhaps that was what had happened today. Something pure and simple could sometimes speak louder than years of training. Meanwhile, the whispers in the hall were growing louder. Some contestants had started talking about her performance, though not directly to her. One of them muttered, "Did you hear that?" She played like, like she was telling a story. Another shook her head and said, "It's strange. She doesn't look like a pianist, and yet..." Their voices trailed off. She did not turn to listen. It was enough for her to know that they were talking, even if it was in surprise or disbelief. The judges were still quietly observing, writing notes, and occasionally looking at each other. She could not see their faces clearly, but she felt their attention. They were trying to understand her, trying to place her in their expectations. Some of them looked almost uncomfortable. One of the older judges leaned back and adjusted his glasses, his eyes fixed on her as if he was studying a mystery. She felt no fear, only a quiet confidence that came from knowing she had given everything she had. She noticed a young woman sitting near her, fiddling with her hands, looking anxious. The woman kept glancing at her, then quickly looking away. She could tell that the young woman wanted to say something, maybe compliment her, maybe ask how she learned to play, but she didn't. She simply nodded gently, a small acknowledgement that said more than words could. Sometimes she thought a smile could carry the same weight as 1,000 compliments. Time passed slowly. Contestants went on and off the stage. Some played loudly and quickly, trying to impress the judges. Others played softly and carefully, trying not to make mistakes. She watched all of them, absorbing the music and the energy in the room. She was learning even now, learning how people played, how they prepared, how they showed themselves to the world. She realized that this place, with all its tension and expectation, was not just about winning. It was about courage. The courage to stand in front of strangers and give a part of yourself without knowing if it would be accepted. As the hours wore on, she began to feel the weight of the day. Her stomach was empty. Her legs were stiff from sitting, and her hands were sore from gripping her bag tightly. But she also felt alive in a way she had not felt in a long time. She had faced a room full of judgment and had not wavered. She had played from her heart, and somehow that had mattered. During a short break, she stepped outside into the fresh air. The sky was a pale blue, and a gentle breeze stirred her hair. She leaned against the wall, letting the sunlight warm her face. People passed by, some glancing at her curiously, others ignoring her completely. She felt small and yet important at the same time. It was a strange feeling, one that was both frightening and exhilarating. She thought about what had brought her here. The years of practice alone, the nights when she had no one to listen, the tiny victories when a note came out right for the first time. She remembered her mother's encouragement, the promise she had made to keep playing no matter what. All of it had led to this moment, to the quiet acknowledgement of her talent by people who had not expected her to have any. When she returned to the hall, the next round of contestants was beginning. A few people whispered as she walked by, giving her strange looks. Some were admiring, some skeptical, and some still clearly judging. She ignored them. She had learned long ago that people would think what they wanted, and that their opinions did not define her worth. She had come here for herself, for the music, and for the promise she had made to her mother. As she waited, she noticed a small boy in the audience, maybe 7 or 8 years old, watching the stage with wide eyes. He clutched a small notebook and pencil, like he was trying to capture every sound. She thought about how he might be seeing something important, something beyond the competition, something pure about the way music could touch the heart. She smiled quietly to herself. That boy, in his own way, was learning a lesson she had learned long ago. That music was not just about notes and technique. It was about feeling, about connecting, about sharing something invisible yet real. Back in the hall, the judges whispered among themselves again. She could sense their attention drifting back to her. Some of them exchanged glances, almost as if they were debating whether her performance could fit into their understanding of talent. She knew that her music did not fit their usual expectations. It had not been about speed or technical mastery. It had been about honesty, about letting her soul speak through her fingers, and that was something that could not be measured easily on a score sheet. She thought about her life up to this point. Every odd job, every quiet evening at the piano, every struggle she had faced alone. It had all prepared her for this day. The waiting, the whispers, the doubts, they were all part of the journey. And now, even in this place filled with polished, confident musicians, she could feel that journey had meaning. Finally, her name was called again, this time for a small follow-up performance. She walked toward the stage, carrying the same quiet determination she had brought earlier. People glanced at her as she passed. some with admiration, some with barely concealed doubt. She ignored them, focusing only on the piano ahead. As she sat down, she closed her eyes for a moment. She let the memory of her mother, the little restaurant piano, and the nights spent learning alone fill her mind. She took a deep breath and placed her fingers on the keys, ready to play once more. This time, she was not just playing to be heard. She was playing to tell a story, to make them feel what she had lived, to show that simplicity could hold beauty and power. The first note rang out clearly, carrying with it every struggle and every hope she had ever known. As she played, the room shifted again. People stopped whispering. The judges leaned in, and even some of the contestants stopped what they were doing, listening. The music moved slowly at first, then swelled with feeling. Every note, every pause, every gentle touch of the keys spoke of a life lived quietly, with honesty and courage. And in that moment, she realized that it was not about proving herself to anyone. It was about proving to herself that she had the courage to play, no matter the doubt, no matter the judgment. She had come this far, and no one could take that away from her. The sun was barely up when she stepped off the old bus that morning. The air was cool and the streets were just beginning to fill with the sound of car engines and people rushing to work. She clutched a small brown bag to her chest and looked at the tall building ahead of her. A golden sign above the glass doors read National Music Conservatory, Annual Piano Auditions. For a moment, she just stood there staring. Her dress was plain and slightly faded. Her shoes were old and scuffed, the kind that had seen too many long walks and rainy days. Her hair was neatly tied back, though a few strands escaped with the wind. She didn't look like someone who belonged there among the polished, confident musicians who were already walking in, dressed in fine coats and carrying sheet music in leather folders. Still, she walked toward the entrance slowly but with purpose. Each step felt heavier as she got closer. People passed by her without noticing, except for a few who glanced and quickly looked away. She could almost feel the quiet judgment in their eyes. But she had come too far to turn back now. Inside, the lobby gleamed with marble floors and soft golden lights. A large banner near the registration desk read, "Welcome to the 22nd Annual Piano Excellence Auditions." Contestants were checking in, laughing, and warming up their fingers on imaginary keyboards. The sound of casual conversation, polite laughter, and the tapping of shoes echoed around her. She took her place in the line at the registration table. The woman behind the desk smiled politely at everyone, until it was her turn. For a second, the woman's expression shifted slightly, just a flicker of surprise before she returned to her polite tone. "Name, please?" she asked. The woman gave her name softly. The receptionist flipped through the papers, then looked back at her. "You're registered for the amateur open category, correct?" "Yes," she replied. "All right. You'll be in Hall C. They'll call your name when it's your turn," the receptionist said, sliding a small card toward her. "Good luck." She thanked her quietly and stepped aside, holding the card like it was something precious. Around her, the other contestants seemed to belong to another world. They were confident, joking with one another, discussing techniques and composers she had only read about in magazines. Some of them had their teachers with them, older, elegant people who gave last-minute advice in hushed tones. She found a seat in the back of the room and sat quietly, listening. One young man nearby glanced at her and then whispered something to his friend. Both chuckled softly. She heard one of them say, "Maybe she's here to clean the piano." The word stung, but she didn't show it. She looked down at her hands, the same hands that had washed dishes, cleaned tables, and played piano keys late at night when the world was asleep. Her turn wouldn't come for a while, so she waited, watching as others went in and came out. Some looked disappointed, some smiled proudly. The sound of the piano from behind the closed doors drifted out into the waiting hall, quick, confident pieces full of energy. Each one reminded her of how far away she was from this world. She remembered the old piano in the restaurant where she worked. It sat near the corner, half out of tune with a few keys that stuck. On slow nights, when the owner allowed it, she played softly for the customers. No one paid much attention then. Some even asked her to stop so they could talk. But there were moments when she forgot where she was, when her fingers moved by themselves and her heart poured through the music. Those moments were the only ones that ever made her feel truly alive. She had always dreamed of learning properly, but lessons were expensive. Every time she saved a little money, something came up. Rent, bills, medicine for her mother. She used to play for her mother every night right before bed. Her mother would close her eyes and listen with a gentle smile, saying, "You don't need fancy schools to play from the heart." Her mother was gone now, and life had become a blur of long shifts and lonely evenings. Still, she never stopped playing. When she heard about these auditions, she thought it was crazy at first. But then she told herself maybe she could try once, just once. Maybe someone would finally hear what she had inside. The hours moved slowly. Her stomach growled quietly. She hadn't eaten since morning. She pulled out a small sandwich from her bag and ate it discreetly. A few people nearby noticed and gave her curious looks, but she didn't care. She wasn't there to impress anyone with how she looked. When a woman in a black suit came out and called the next group of names, her heart skipped a beat. Her name was among them. She stood up, clutching her card tightly. Her legs felt weak, but she forced herself to walk steadily. The others in her group, 5 contestants, looked confident, chatting as they entered Hall C. She followed silently behind. The hall was beautiful. A grand piano stood on the stage, shining under the lights. 3 judges sat at a long table, papers and pens in front of them. A small audience of teachers, parents, and students filled a few rows in the back. It wasn't a full concert, but to her it felt like stepping into a dream. The first contestant took the stage, a young woman in a glittering blue dress. Her fingers flew across the keys, playing a complex classical piece. The judges nodded approvingly. When she finished, the audience clapped politely. The next contestant followed, then another. Each one seemed better than the last. By the time her turn came, her hands were cold. The judge on the left looked at her over his glasses and said, "You may begin when you're ready." She nodded and walked to the piano. The chair felt strange beneath her. She placed her fingers gently on the keys and closed her eyes for a moment. She could hear her heart beating. Somewhere in the audience, someone coughed. Someone else whispered, and a few people chuckled quietly. She didn't look at them. She just took a slow breath. She wasn't thinking about the judges anymore. She wasn't thinking about the laughter or the marble floor or the shining lights. She was back in that small restaurant again, playing softly for her mother, who sat in the corner listening. She felt the warmth of those memories fill her chest. Her fingers pressed the first notes. They were soft, trembling slightly, but unreal. She didn't play from memory or sheet music. She played from the heart. The melody was simple, almost too simple for a competition like this, but there was something in it that made people stop whispering. The room grew quiet. The judges leaned forward slightly. Even the young man who had mocked her earlier sat still, his eyes fixed on her hands. She continued playing, unaware of the silence she had created. Every note carried a story, of struggle, of loss, of hope. Her hands moved faster now, surer. The sound filled the room like sunlight through an open window. It was not perfect, but it was alive. When she reached the final note, she let it linger for a moment before lifting her hands. The hall remained silent. She didn't look up right away. When she finally did, she saw the judges watching her, not smiling, not frowning, just watching as if trying to understand what they had just heard. She stood up quietly and bowed. No one said anything for a long moment. Then slowly the hall filled with gentle applause. Not loud or showy, just quiet, respectful clapping that seemed to say more than words. She walked back to her seat without looking at anyone. Her hands were still shaking, but her heart felt strangely light. She didn't know if she would win or not. She didn't even know if they truly understood what she played. But for the first time, she felt seen. As she sat back down, one of the contestants beside her leaned closer and whispered, "That was beautiful." She smiled softly, not trusting her voice to speak. Outside, through the tall windows, the sunlight had grown brighter. It touched the stage, the piano, and her worn-out shoes, as if even the light wanted to honor what she had just done. And in that moment, she realized something. No matter what the judges decided, she had already won the battle she came here for. She had faced the world that doubted her, and played anyway.